So John, what kinds of lessons learned are there from a big extreme scale systems like you guys have deployed? So
lessons learned, one thing is when you have these large scale deployments, it's never a sprint. It's a marathon. And whenever you hit issues, well, you're always going to hit some level of issues. You know, you fix one issue, you might find another. But the key is to keep being persistent and patient when you find these issues, because the most important thing you want to do is get the appropriate information, get it to the right development teams to find out the opportunity to fix the code, and then because we're board members of OpenSFS, provide any of the improvements that we've done back to the community so they could benefit entirely from what we've learned. And the other thing is, what we learned and demonstrated with the ClusterStor product line is the resiliency and the uptime. We had, you know, in ClusterStor altogether, our failout rate for disk drives is much lower than the industry average because of the number of tests that we demonstrate with disk drives and the partnership that we have. We're less than 0.5% of failout for these drives in the first 6 months of any deployment.
So I wanted to ask you about that because you know, I just assume a disk drive is a disk drive, right? And everyone's building machines out of the same components. But Xyratex has kind of an edge there, don't they, in terms of with the testing equipment?
Oh yeah, so we have a whole division for disk drive test equipment, and a lot of the vendors leverage our technology to do internal testing and then the disk drive manufacturing site. So we have a lot of insight and partnerships on what goes on in terms of disk drive testing in the manufacturing process. And with that, we do even further testing at the chassis level first, rigorous testing in our manufacturing plant. And then we take additional testing of the chassis level, and then we take those building blocks and we put it together in a solution of ClusterStor and do further soak testing and resiliency testing before we actually have the product land at a customer site. And because we identify a lot of the fallout, and if we see any disk drives having any type of discrepancy because of our relationship with those vendors, we go back to them and they do further testing and even improve the process as well.
So John, you know, Xyratex is known for some of these extreme scale systems, but is that technology of value to, you know, the folks that might be doing smaller deployments?
Oh, definitely. When you work at these large scales, you're always going to be working in corner cases. So you find a lot of things you wouldn't normally find in smaller deployments, but you might hit them in some cases. But when you look at smaller deployments in departmental, this is where you look at commercial HPC. So it's critical to be available, uptime, resilient, because any type of loss of data access is completely critical for these types of customers. So working at large scales, finding these corner cases and providing patches and fixes, and then land that back up to the community of OpenSFS and the Lustre community altogether, we actually improve the overall resiliency in the product portfolio of ClusterStor and make it more reliable and have the credibility after working at these scales to work with departmental and commercial HPC. And we actually say, have you looked at, you know, the largest file system in the world? We improve the process and we provide a much more resilient product for that type of customer base.
So John, you know, with leading edge technology like we've been discussing here today, it sounds extremely expensive. Is this, does Xyratex cost more per byte than what I could find elsewhere?
So what our feedback from our partners has been it's very cost competitive. And if you look at the technology, there's nothing proprietary built into the solution. We don't leverage desktop drives because we want the better reliability. So it's all nearline SAS drives. We use standard x86 controllers. We use standard SAS protocols. And we use InfiniBand or 10 gig or 40 gig Ethernet. And everything is configured and manufacturing. So you look at all these components, they're all in the industry as commodity components, but the way and a value add that we provide for ClusterStor is the testing, the integration, the software, and then the overall management framework with ClusterStor Manager allows us to build a more resilient solution that's more reliable and scalable, but at a very cost-effective manner.